The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome to the Women in Depth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Viado. Join me as we explore the inner lives of women, their struggles, fears, hopes, and dreams. We'll go beneath the surface and take a deeper look at what is hidden, unknown, uncertain, and uncomfortable. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, my guest is Emma Cameron. Emma is a United Kingdom Council for Psychotherapy registered Integrative Arts Psychotherapist based in Essex, England. She works in private practice and also online with creative, sensitive, thoughtful women who want to connect to their deepest creative self and heal from anxiety and trauma. Emma has a master's degree in Integrative Arts Psychotherapy and is an HCPC, or Health and Care Professions Council registered art psychotherapist, and also paints and draws herself. She has been a practicing artist for many years with many solo shows. Through 2017, Emma's work was featured in Contemporary Masters from Britain, an exhibition touring major art galleries in China, and next year she will be exhibiting paintings in Poland and the UK. Today, Emma will be talking to us about connecting to your creativity, a connection that many of us lose in some way and find it difficult to gain or to reconnect in our later years. So today she'll talk about how this disconnection happens and ways to reconnect with our creativity and benefit from many of the aspects that creativity can bring into our lives. And so, without any further ado, welcome Emma to the podcast.
Hi, Lourdes. Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here, Emma. And thank you so much, too, for your patience with the scheduling and logistics. But here we are now, and we're doing it.
Yay!
And so, Emma, first I want to congratulate you on the exhibition of your art last year and this coming year. Very excited for you.
Thank you. Yeah.
So today I'd like to just start with finding out a little bit more about how you were drawn to work with art as a healing modality and therapy, and also perhaps how you were drawn to creativity yourself.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a family where it was considered okay and good to paint and draw, so that helped. And I went to art college when I was in my early 20s in London, and I studied there, and then I was a practicing artist for many years, painting and drawing. And eventually in midlife, I really felt very drawn to psychotherapy and art psychotherapy in particular, and I just got more and more interested and eventually decided to do a master's degree in Integrative Arts Psychotherapy, again in London. I just absolutely loved every moment of it. I felt like this, I'd come home, that this integrated all sorts of parts of me, things that I was interested in, and things about connecting to people and working with people and helping people, and also bringing my own creativity into it and helping other people to bring out their own latent creativity and to use that. I just totally love it.
I just thought to myself how energized you sound when you were talking, and I thought it sounds like this is, this integration of art and therapy is very vitalizing and expansive for you.
Yeah, good words, vitalizing and expansive, definitely. And I want to sort of spread that and help other people benefit from that in their own lives.
Well, I think that it's such a unique approach that you offer and so needed, because much as what we would call traditional or talk therapy is, does a lot of good and works for many people. I believe that art or creativity helps many people access or deepen this process of healing in ways that talk therapy cannot.
Yeah, that's right. I think you're tapping into different parts of your brain and different parts of your self quite deeply when you're using art materials. And the talking is important as well. And we don't leave that out, but we really try and have something that feels experiential. And because I feel like in therapy, connecting to your feelings and connecting to some sort of deep sense of this is me can be so healing and so profound. And I think that the arts are a really good way of doing that.
From my personal experience, and I would be one of those people who would say I'm not an artist, so I'm guilty there. But what I've noticed is when I do something creative, which one of the things I like to do is it's more of painting ceramics. I like doing that. Yeah, I find that when I'm in that space, I am actually really just present. It's one of the times I can more easily disengage from everything else in the world. So it's very restful, actually.
Yes, that's what so many people find when they're creating something, whatever it is. They can just feel like they're there in the moment, and it's just such a release and allowing yourself to sort of rest, but in an energized kind of a way.
Yeah.
I think is just really wonderful. And yes, certainly anything creative can really help with that.
So, Emma, I'd like to start with a basic question, but I think it's not so basic. And that question is, what is creativity, or what does it mean to be creative?
Great question. I think all of us have an inner urge to grow. And, in psychotherapy, we call it different things. So I think one school of psychotherapy calls it physis, I think. Another school calls it transformance. Lots of words, but this inner urge to grow and to just to sort of be in a way that's sort of living and growing and changing. And you can't see me, but I'm moving my hands around in a way to sort of try and express this, that we all have this in us. Sometimes we tap into it and sometimes we don't. And I really feel that the more that we can tap into it, the more it can be used by us to feed our whole self, our whole life. And I think it's just really a very basic part of being human. A lot of us don't realize this, but I think a lot of people kind of know it on a sort of deep level somewhere, even if they actually try and suppress it or have always tried to suppress it. So there's this inner urge, and it's things that are there, this sense of growth and of change and of creativity, creation. I think it's just a basic thing in people.
And that's so interesting that I think many would say, me included at some point, that I'm not creative. And I think that, this is a really wonderful segue to my next question, which is, what are a lot of the misconceptions about creativity? And I think one of them is that certain people are creative and certain people aren't.
Yeah. That's a real misconception. And it's based on this false idea that of either or, that you're either creative or you're not. And there's a competition that some people win and some people lose. And it's just, that's a very left brain way of thinking. And we can all fall into that trap very easily. And it's really helpful, I think, when we sort of allow a more right brain way of thinking, which is to consider the whole, consider both and. So I can be creative and you can in our different ways. And just because one person is creative in one way, it doesn't make another person's way of being creative any less, that it's allowed to all of us. And I think we grow up with this idea that, it's for some people and not for others. And I think another thing that happens is that people have art wounds or art scars. Because I've noticed that most people who say to me, "Oh, well, I'm not creative," or "I can't paint, I can't draw, I can't whatever," if you ask them, what happened to you? Have you got a memory of being told this? How did you learn you weren't creative? And people will very often have a memory of a time when either a relative or a friend or a teacher, very often a teacher, shamed them or made them feel that their attempts to be creative were not okay, were not enough in some way. And those experiences can cut very, very deep. It's really quite remarkable how one thing that's said to someone when they're at the age of 8 or 5 or 12 can just get in there so much and affect people so profoundly that it makes them then, from then on, believe that this way of being, this creative way of being, is blocked to them. It's so sad.
Yeah, and I have worked with clients who that has happened to, where just sharing in session aspects of themselves that they left behind, and a lot of it being creativity. And yeah, it's just very powerful. I also think too that in addition to like the more direct, overt ways of being wounded, I think often parents, other caregivers, teachers, without saying it directly, they show what the child will receive approval and love and encouragement for, which could be sports or academics in the sense of math and science. And the child easily sees that when I move in this direction, I get a lot of approval, a love, attention, whereas not so much when I'm doing what we would call creative things.
Yes. Yeah, that can really happen a lot.
So are there any other misconceptions, Emma, that you see like people coming in with when it comes to creativity?
Yeah, I think people really tell themselves stories about why they aren't or can't be creative. And that's natural because, the way our brains are built is to make stories, to make meanings. But it's quite interesting if we sort of stop and look at the stories that we're telling ourselves about why we can't be creative. And very often we'll say, "Oh, well, I haven't got enough money, I can't afford to buy the art materials," or whatever it is. Or the other big one is, "I haven't got enough time. I just don't have time." And both of those actually can be challenged. It's quite interesting because very often underneath there's more sort of hidden sort of shame feelings that are harder for people to talk about. And so we look at the money and the time thing, both of which can be thought about in different ways. So, even if you have no money, you might still go out into the woods and create a little sculpture with some leaves and stones. People can find ways of being creative without having access to money. It really is possible. And as far as time goes, yes, you might not have 5 hours a day to to carve your stone carving, but you might have 15 minutes when, instead of checking through social media, you might actually do a drawing or pick up your knitting or do something creative.
As you're talking about, I don't have enough materials, I don't have enough time. I've even heard I don't have a space, for it. I don't know where I would do this.
That's another big one. Yes.
I think it falls under this this idea that there's a right way to be creative.
Exactly. That's so well put. And really, there isn't a right way to be creative. There are so many infinite ways that we can be creative. And we just have to allow ourselves to play. And that's what it boils down to, really. Can we allow ourselves to play in small ways, growing bigger, and just try things out? And because I think what we often do is we think, right, I want to be creative. And we picture this wonderful this wonderful tapestry that we've made, or this beautiful pot that we've formed, and it's actually probably not going to work like that. So we have to be much more allowing ourselves to just try things out and to make mistakes. And that's so crucial, is can we allow ourselves to make mistakes and maybe use the mistakes to take us on a different journey. So, for example, if you're playing around with watercolor paints and you find that actually you really don't like what you've come up with, instead of seeing that as a failure and an end point, maybe you could then rip up the piece that you made and rearrange it into a collage, or use it to cover a box, or there's lots of ways that you can repurpose, and that is so creative in itself, finding new ways to use and benefit from your own mistakes and your own dead ends and things. Things can build build upon other things in really unexpected ways, and that is the essence of creativity, really. It's just about putting things together in new ways, seeing and feeling your way into what feels right about this, what doesn't feel right about this, what might I feel an inner urge to change, to tweak, and to add or to take away.
Yeah, I think that as you're describing this, that it's not one of the things, but something that can happen with creativity that I think is a challenge for many of us, is that we get used to, or we get trained to expect clear directions of, this is step 1, and then this is what will happen, and then this is step 2, and then if you get to this, then you're doing it right. We get accustomed to things being clearly laid out to us, and then we get used to also a way that this is how we know that we did it right, because we are evaluated on, or judged or critiqued on certain things. And then there's I would say for most of us, we also learn to work towards a goal which says, this is done and I completed it and I did well or not well or whatever. And I think with art, first of all, there's like really no clear-cut way to do this. And then the other aspect of it is, there really is no, standard to say, this is where you are, this is how you're doing. And it's not so much that you finish something that you created, or that now you get a gold star or recognition for achieving something. It's with art, a lot of it is the process, and there's really no external authority that's going to say you're done and you did well. It's like,
yeah.
And so I think that art actually really is a metaphor or a parallel for life, but we want things to be cleared out. We want things to be clear. We want to know the next step. We want to know how we did. And that's all pulling us into our logistic, rational brain. And I feel like like art helps us to go back to that intuitive part of ourselves where, we don't know. Okay. We don't know how this is going to go. Just go. And it's going to be, I guess we call it messy, but maybe it's not messy. That's just a value or a judgment. It's just, like you said, you experiment, you didn't like it, so try something different. Maybe watercolors aren't your thing, and it's really, again, like, I just kept thinking, like with my son and watching him create, he's just so unattached to what he's doing. He just grabs whatever, and I look at it and he tells me what it is, and then he's done with it. It's just really that experience of creating. And so anyway, I had to share,
Yeah, I totally agree with all that you've said. Yes, it really is about just letting go of judgments and goals and all of that way of thinking, and just allowing yourself to sink down into some more inner kind of knowing, and some more experimental, curious, playful way of being, really.
Yeah. Now I can, it really just deepens for me why it's a place we long for and yearn for and intuitively know is a part of ourselves, but also are so uncomfortable with,
Yeah. And that's sad, but also wonderful when we can grow more comfortable with it just by doing it, and by repeatedly allowing ourselves to be playful, and by practicing what it might be like to not judge, and to just try things out and play around and not have an end goal in mind. And it can be so freeing, and it really helps us to get in touch with our own intuition and our own body's way of knowing things and of being in the world.
You've touched on so many of the benefits of creativity. And so maybe some of these, you've already answered my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do the benefits of creativity translate into the therapeutic container? How is creativity beneficial in therapy?
What a great question, and what a big question. So if we're thinking about using creativity in therapy, I think, we can get away from thinking that it's just about painting or drawing, art therapy. Creativity in therapy could be more about envisaging things and metaphors and those kinds of things. I do also myself in therapy sessions with my clients use a variety of art forms, and that might include puppets, it might include the sand tray with little objects in it might include postcards and paints and paper and all of those things as well. Play-Doh I like to use, handling stones, natural materials, and maybe arranging those. And that could be a whole other interview, Lourdes, on why to use the arts in therapy sessions. And also, if we're just thinking about art as therapy, which is different from art therapy, so clients might be connecting to their creativity outside of sessions, and then they might talk about it and talk about things that brings up for them, that can then be processed with the therapist. There's all sorts of ways.
How about, this just came to mind as you're sharing, how about music? Music as a medium for art therapy.
Well, there are music therapists and who do great work, and that's a wonderful way of connecting with something that's quite deep. I personally don't use instruments in therapy myself. Some integrative arts psychotherapists do, especially if they can play an instrument. And as I say, there are music therapists who use music as a fundamental part of the work.
So if I was a new client and I was coming in, maybe it's just my first several sessions, what could I possibly expect?
I might start you off on your first session with me, partly working to help you feel safe and okay with me and connected with me. And also we might get out my collection of postcards. I have a lot of postcards, and I might ask you to just flick through them without thinking too hard and just allow yourself to be drawn to maybe 3 or 4 postcards that really appeal to you, that really speak to you of something that feels good and feels like growth and healing and wholeness. And you'll probably be coming to therapy with a sense of yourself as a bit broken, a bit struggling, a bit overwhelmed or whatever. But we might, from this first session, we might be looking at, well, what helps you feel more whole? What are you striving for? When have you been your times when you felt like you're your best self? And we might look at those. We might also, I might also ask you to pick out maybe 3 or 4 postcards that speak to you somehow about your difficulties, so that it can help me to understand your difficulties in a fuller way. And images just hold so much. The images I've got on postcards they're mostly artworks of different types. Some of them are photographs. I've never had a client who couldn't identify with some of my postcards and say, oh, that's it, that's the feeling, and then sort of talk to me about the feeling that for them is in that card. So that's something that we might do in the first session, and then in subsequent sessions I might invite you to play around in the sand tray with, I've got lots of little figures and stones and shells and things, and I might invite you to show me something in the sand tray. So it might be show me, okay, the important people in your life, or it might be you might want to explore a dream, or you might want to explore a situation in a relationship that you're struggling with. So that can all be shown in the sand tray in a way that you don't have to sort of think logically, but people really do find themselves reaching for a little figure or a little object and saying, I don't know why I'm picking this, but it kind of feels right. And they put it in the sand tray, and then we can work with that. And it's just always so amazingly revealing to themselves about, they realize layers of things that they hadn't quite understood before or hadn't seen in this way before. So they see things differently. It's incredible working in that way.
Sounds powerful.
Yeah.
I think of how challenging it could be, or difficult possibly, for some individuals to verbalize what you're describing,
Yeah.
It's powerful.
It's often really hard to put things into words, and people have always, they've tried for ages and tried to tell people maybe, or tried to put it into words for themselves, and it's just not working for them. And then they come and they find that they can pick an object or a postcard or something, and there'll be whole layers of things that we call the unthought known. It's things that you've always known, but you've never been able to put it into thoughts.
I love that.
Yes.
The unthought known. That's great.
Yeah.
And I love that postcard exercise too that you described. It's beautiful, Emma.
Yeah, it's really, really helpful. And another thing that I like to use with people, not everyone wants to, but actually most people end up really loving this exercise. They don't have to do it, but if they want to do it, we get puppets out, and I've got a selection of puppets, and they can use that to explore parts of themselves. And that is really remarkably helpful to some people, because say somebody who is feeling overwhelmed with anxiety and they're really struggling to function in their daily life, the anxiety is so strong, and they might, and I've seen this happen, they'll find that they'll use the puppets, and they'll find that there are puppets who can give them such wisdom, such profound wisdom, and help them see that they've actually got parts of themselves that are actually really, really wise and strong and able. And, they'd been so caught up with their anxiety and their fears that they had completely lost touch with these parts, but using the puppets, they can find that they've got all these amazing qualities that have been lying dormant. It's just beautiful when people connect to themselves in that way.
So powerful. I'm so excited for, and I'll just say it, I'm slightly envious of the clients you work with. How fortunate for those who get to work with you, Emma.
Oh.
So, Emma, for those of us who won't be able to do that, though, and who would like to begin to possibly just reconnect with our creativity, what are some ways that someone can begin to do this?
Well, yes, there are lots of ways, and shall I try a guided visualization?
Absolutely.
For your listeners?
Absolutely, yeah.
So maybe you can, if you're not driving or otherwise busy, but you might find that you can settle and allow yourself a little bit of time to sit comfortably with your eyes closed, and just let yourself breathing out, and let yourself imagine that you're in a peaceful place. Maybe you're beside water, maybe you're on a mountain, or maybe somewhere else that just feels relaxing and calm to you. Allow yourself to drop down inside a little bit and feel that peace, and let your breathing slow down, noticing the gentle rise and fall of your belly as you breathe. And keeping your eyes closed, see if you can imagine there are some art materials beside you. Notice what they are. They might be crumbly, jewel-colored pastels, crayons, or they might be pieces of sun-bleached driftwood, and maybe some tools for carving or building, or maybe knitting needles and some soft, sumptuous wool, inviting you to knit something. Or they might be luscious glowing paints and brushes and canvas. Might be some lovely crumbly coal black charcoal and a giant roll of thick, strong paper. Or the art materials might be something else. Might be something to do with pottery or jewelry making, or just pencils. See what floats into your mind, and then build up the image as fully as you can in your imagination. How do the materials look? Just imagine touching and holding them. How do they feel in your hands? You might even be able to imagine how they smell and sounds that are made when you touch them. Really allow yourself to use your senses here. And just for now, imagine yourself free of any anxiety about what to create. Imagine yourself easily picking up your art materials and intuitively knowing what to do. Your hands are working freely, no hesitation, just moving, forming and shaping, smoothing or tweaking, carving or building. Just notice what happens. You might be able to imagine a whole creative process from start to finish. And you might be able to see your finished creation, whether that's very vague or whether it's actually quite clear. Or you might only get a sense of the early stages and not have any idea how this process might end. Either is fine. And what's important is that you've just glimpsed the start of a trail that's worth following. And now you have a good idea of what you might begin to try in real life. And you might start to muse and wonder about the practicalities. Maybe you imagined a potter's wheel, but you don't know how to find one, or how you might possibly get hold of one or afford one. Or you might have imagined a beautiful woven tapestry, but you've never touched a loom. You might have imagined an enormous canvas, but you live in a tiny apartment. And that's okay, because this is just the ideas stage. This is where the sifting and filtering of your creative ideas begins. And drip by drip, you're going to feed your ideas to your conscious and unconscious mind. And gradually, you might notice things start to happen in your life. You might move a little bit closer to that idea, or you might find that actually you started off feeling like you wanted to make a tapestry, but actually you want to veer off in a different direction, and that's absolutely fine. That's part of the creative process. So we change things, we keep on finding new choice points and taking new directions, and that's part of the fun. So that's one way to answer your question, Lourdes. How we might start to get more in touch with our creativity.
That was beautiful, Emma. Thank you for that. So Emma, for listeners who are, who are closer to you and would love to work with you, or also those who would like to work with you online, what are some of the best ways that people can find you and get in touch with you, learn more about your work?
So my website is emmacameron.com, and on my website you'll find lots of articles about creativity, about well-being, about therapy, and the intersection of all of those. I wrote a post about what is art therapy, so you can read that if you want to know more about art therapy. And people can email me. It's emma@emmacameron.com. I work with clients here in Essex in England. I work with creative, sensitive women in my consulting room, which is my studio, which is in my garden. It's beautiful.
Wow.
Lots of birds singing around and greenery, so that sort of helps feed into the process, I think. And I also work with people online as well, so that's another option.
Emma, how are you able to do online work with art? How does that work?
Yeah, it doesn't.
Okay. Okay.
I often work with people who are creatives and artists, or who are interested in developing their creativity online. We don't actually use art materials in those sessions, but we might talk about it. We might use metaphors, work with metaphors a lot, and just tune into certain things in them that are related to their creativity, because I think quite often people feel that it's not something they can kind of talk about. And I feel like people are drawn to working with me sometimes because they want to talk to someone who seems to understand about how important and helpful it can be for many of us to connect to our creativity.
Emma, thank you so much for your time today, for your insights and deep wisdom. Lovely conversation. And I'm excited to start playing around more with my creativity, those parts of me, and expanding what I'm currently doing. So thank you for this gift.
Good. You're very welcome. Very nice to speak with you.
And we will be sure to include all of your links, your website, social media links in the show notes so that our listeners can find you and get in touch with you.
Great, thank you. And I'll include, I'll give you a link to my website page, which has that guided imagery that we did, has it written down in case people want to see it written and perhaps read it to somebody else. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Emma. And I'm very excited to share our conversation with the world.
Thank you, Lourdes.
Okay, take care. Thanks so much for listening to the Women in Depth podcast. I hope it brings you a deeper understanding of yourself and others, and that you found some insights that illuminated and inspired. You can follow Women in Depth on Facebook and YouTube, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. And finally, if you enjoy Women in Depth, please share with a friend. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.